Sensational Saturday, everyone. This is Furley Almonte, and I welcome you to another life changing edition of the D Word. Well, my co host Carolina Denhard is supposed to be here. Unfortunately, she has a family emergency that she really needs to attend to, so she sends us her love. But today is going to change your life in so many different ways because we are going to see one of the challenges that parents go through when it comes to raising their children. And that is when you're raising children with autism. It's so much harder. And oftentimes, the adversities that we go through in life actually lead us to our higher calling in life. And our special guest today is amazingly remarkable in that aspect because she has turned her tragedy into something so beautiful and so meaningful to basically celebrate the memory of her wonderful child. So, welcome to the show, Cindy Gelormini. Hello.
Thanks. Yes, it's Gelormini. I was waiting for you with
Gelormini,
the pause. I was like, oh, she's trying to think of how to pronounce it.
Gelormini, all right.
Yes.
First of all, I didn't get to tell you guys that not only is she a really wonderful author of a children's book series, but she's also a paint diva. But we'll go through that because you will see how magnificently she was able to infuse all of her innate talents and turn it into such magnificent product that changes lives. Cindy, so my goodness, why don't you give us maybe a 5 to 8 minute version of your backstory as to how you were actually um, basically moved through this incredible higher calling in life?
Okay, sure. So I am, as you said, I'm the paint diva. That's my business, but I'm a mom. I have 4 children. Actually, if I move this, you can see the picture right up there of my kids.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I had twin girls, and then 4.5 years later, I had my son Robbie, and then 5 years later, I had my son David. So I spaced them all out. And then when I had Robbie, his development was delayed, and I was very naive at the time. I didn't know what that meant. I thought, okay, it's delayed, but eventually he'll catch up, because eventually he crawled, eventually he walked, and he had said a few words, but it was only when he was stressed. Like if I dropped him off in the nursery to go work out, typically a kid cries for his mommy, But about 3 months went by, and I realized I hadn't heard him say anything. So I mentioned to a friend of mine that was a speech therapist, and her eyes went like this. She says, "You need to get him evaluated immediately." And I took him to get evaluated. And because he had had ear infections and things, we thought he was hearing impaired a little bit, that he couldn't hear high pitched sounds. And thought, okay, we'll get tubes in his ears and eventually he'll hear and he'll start talking again. But when I had him in there, one of the therapists pulled me aside and she said, "Listen, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I don't think this is hearing loss. I think that we're looking at autism here and you need to get him evaluated." So I took him to a developmental pediatrician. Sure enough, that was the diagnosis. But Robbie would be 30 years old. So this was a long time ago. And at the time, nobody had autism. It was kind of unheard of. And he handed me a little pamphlet. He said, "Here, take this home and read it. And I recommend that you go look at the Developmental Learning Center, a school." And that was it. Never saw him again. Didn't say, "Come back and see me in a month." And there was no internet back then. So I had no way. He was born in 1989. I had no way of looking it up. I didn't even know what that meant. So, over the years, I certainly learned what autism was. Back then, it was 1 in 10,000 kids were being diagnosed with autism. Now it's 1 in 50 nationally, but in New Jersey, it's 1 in 32. 1 in 32 children.
Well, you know what? Maybe you can address a little bit to that because that's very alarming. From 1 to 10,000.
How do we go from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 32? Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I mean, is it because people are just more aware now that they're being able to diagnose it, or is it because there's really more prevalence to it? Do you know?
I think it's both. I don't know. I have a podcast myself now where I talk about autism, and I've been trying to get at that question myself. New Jersey has really good resources for children, so a lot of people move to New Jersey, once their kid is diagnosed. And I've heard that like pediatricians these days, it's a part of their checklist. I mean, now they're looking for it. Where when my son was little, my pediatrician said, "Oh, he'll be fine. Don't worry about it. His sisters are spoiling him. My own brother didn't talk till he was 3 years old. He'll be fine." Where now that those are all red flags, and a pediatrician would pick up on that right away. So I think they're
Very
quicker to
interesting.
diagnose, but
There's a lot of parents that are in denial, right? Because you don't want you want your kids to be perfect, so to speak, right? So what would you say to a parent that may not be so open to receiving that kind of diagnosis? How was it different for you?
well, when they did diagnose him, at first they wouldn't say autism. They had to label him preschool handicapped until he was 5 years old, and they were so afraid to tell me this. They were so afraid that I was going to freak out and say, "Not my child," whatever, that they didn't even want to tell me. And they very gently said, "Listen, I know you probably don't want him to be called handicapped, but in the long run, this is going to be very helpful to you because it will help him get the help that he needs. He'll be able to get into special schools and have therapies and all these type of things. But you have to have the diagnosis, to have this." And again, I'm thinking, okay, this is a temporary label. And by the time he's 5, he'll be talking, he'll be fine, and he'll go off to kindergarten like everybody else. So I didn't react that way. I didn't understand what the big deal was. It wasn't until much later that I realized what a severe diagnosis they really were handing me. And I've seen parents do both things. Yes, they're in denial. And I thought that because my son was a boy, I thought, wow, boys are really stubborn. They're really different. Like I would call his name and he wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't answer me. I'd say, "Robbie, come here," and he would run the other way. And I just thought, man, boys are really harder to handle. And I'm sure there's a lot of parents that feel that way too. But now because it's so prevalent, I think parents they fear it. Um, and then there are other parents that I've interviewed, as soon as I got the diagnosis, I will tell you what happens is it's you think you have, everybody has dream and aspirations, right? My son was Robbie Jr. Okay. My husband was a baseball player. So right away, as soon as the baby's born, you buy him Yankees outfits and you think, oh, my son is going to be the next Derek Jeter. And, everybody does that, right? And then all of a sudden they say to you, "No, you have a disabled child." And then you realize all those hopes and aspirations you have are gone. And it's kind of like they took the child I knew, he's gone, and now they replace him with, "No, you have this disabled child now instead." So I had to go through really mourning for a week for the child that I thought that I had that was not there anymore. And then fall in love with this new child. And I just said, "Okay, let's get her done. What do we need to do?" Okay, great. The doctor said, put him in this school. That's what we're going to do. What does he need now? And it's a shift. And I've seen people that get divorced go through the same thing. Everyone has these, I call it Cinderella syndrome. Everybody wants to marry the handsome prince and live in a castle and have the perfect 2.3 children and a dog, and then all of a sudden that's taken away, and you got to shift, and you can't spend your life being angry and upset about what you didn't get that you were dreaming of. It's like, no, this is my life. Okay, let's make this life now the best that I can make it. And it was
So what
about
was the
my son.
progression like from the 5-year-old? Now you were told of the official diagnosis, and then what was his health progression as to the day that he passed?
So he went to the school. Robbie never learned how to speak. Those couple words that he had, he lost, never came back, and he sort of digressed, and it just seemed like he didn't even understand a word that you were saying. So his school would work on communication with him. So speech therapy for him was not necessarily trying to get him to speak. They would give him pictures to communicate. So they would put items in front of him and say they wanted him to request a drink of water. He'd have a picture of a red Solo cup, and he would have to pull it off and hand him the picture of the cup, and then they would give him the cup, and it was a way to try to help him communicate so he wouldn't be so frustrated. that's the biggest issue, is the communication, you know, and then you start seeing behaviors and everything because they can't communicate. They can't tell you what they need. Robbie watched Disney movies obsessively. He loved the repetition of it, and he loved the music. The school tried to potty train him, but he always was in a pull up. He never got out of that. And you know, things, just trying to keep him busy, and because he'd get bored of his Disney movies, but yet he didn't want to watch a new one either. So it was the frustrations were whenever he was off of school, you know, the week of Christmas vacation and stuff, just trying to keep him busy and find things to do were very frustrating.
So how did you have a career?
Yeah. So I used to work in an office as an editor, and that just didn't work. Trying to get babysitters to get him off the bus at 3:00 and just watch him for an hour, they all would always quit because he'd run away. He didn't listen. They didn't understand him. They didn't know how to work with him. He jumped up and down. He broke things, you know, that just never worked. So I stopped that. And in the meantime, I had been, you know, fooling around painting murals for people. And I also used to teach aerobics on the side, like on the weekends and at night. And so I painted some like Disney murals at the Y and at the health club and stuff like that. And people started asking me to do it for them. So I made a career shift, and my husband freaked out because he's like, how are we going to pay the mortgage? You know? And I'm like, this is what I have to do, you know? And that came after I had my other son. Once I had my youngest, David, I said, I'm not going back to work. And that's when he had the freak out.
And then there was something that I read that was, you know, there was a point in time in his life that he started having seizures. When did that stop?
So that was, yeah. So what I was going to say is I had my own business, so I could be home at 3:00. Okay. When puberty hits, it's, you know, all boys get, you know, angry and more aggressive and, you know, whatever. But for an autistic kid that his hormones are going crazy and stuff, he started getting violent. And I see a lot of parents go through this, and he would just come at my husband and just grab him and yank him to the floor. And he wouldn't stop until he heard his shirt rip. And then that's when he would stop. He would go in my living room, take all my cushions off the couch and throw them. He would slam doors. One time he couldn't find me in the morning, and I heard crashing in the morning, and I woke up, and he was grabbing my dishes and throwing them down the basement steps, and they were just smashed into pieces because because I was still sleeping, and my husband went out to go get coffee, and he didn't know where anybody was. So he just was, you know, puberty time becomes very, very, very difficult. So then when he was 17, he was having these episodes where he would start vomiting on the weekends. He'd either have diarrhea or vomiting. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. You tested GI issues, you know, whatever. And then he had his first seizure. And I'm actually in the room that he was in. My husband heard this noise from outside. And when he came in, it was my son's. He was banging, his body was banging against the wall. And then he just like passed out or whatever, and turned blue. And, you know, they called the rescue squad. I wasn't here. They called the rescue squad. They came, and my husband was doing CPR on him, and they took him out to the ambulance. He was not awake. I mean, he was gone, and for about 15 minutes. And then my husband thought he was going to have to call me and tell me that Robbie was gone. And then all of a sudden, this guy from the squad ran back and knocked on the door and said, "He's back. He's awake." And he came back in the ambulance. But that began our journey with the seizures. They call them tonic-clonic seizures, which are the grand mal seizures.
What's that again?
It's grand mal seizures, but I think the technical term now is called tonic-clonic seizures. You know, I'm not a medical person.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, wow, you know, I am amazed at, you know, of course, like your strength, your unconditional love, your ability to adapt to the demands, because I could just imagine what that could do to families, to husband and wives, and you know, like, actually, like, you know that if Carolina was here, I would love to have asked her, like, say, for example, how does it affect marriages?
So I will tell you, there's an 80% divorce rate within families that have autistic kids because it's that
Wow.
stressful. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think it begins in the very beginning, and I address this in my children's books, again, like the Cinderella syndrome and stuff. But with and what I noticed is that a lot of times men have an issue with it's their ego that can't handle that their mini me is not, you know, the next star. Um, and you got to let it go, and
You and
you
your
have to
husband.
love that child for who they are, and that's for any child. I just feel that God created all of my children with their own destiny and purpose, and it's my job as a parent to figure out what their gifts and talents are and to encourage them in that and raise them to be who God created them to be. Okay,
So,
so
Cindy,
yes.
how did you and your husband fall into the 20% that successfully stayed together?
Because, well, we fight a lot. I have a very good friend that she and her husband never fought, for 15 years, whatever it was. And then one day they had a fight and that was it. Their marriage was over. So,
So,
and I've seen
what
my
a few
husband's
tips,
Italian
because I'm
family.
sure there's a lot of, they don't even have to have a child with autism for them to keep
Yeah.
fighting. But no, because you have a very challenging situation.
Yeah.
And so, what did you do differently than any other couples whose marriages have failed that made you somehow weather the storm?
Well, in the very beginning, this is the theme of my books. When Robbie was a little boy, kind of after he was first diagnosed, I used to go to a church that taught Word of Faith, which basically means you look at Bible scriptures and you pray those scriptures. So if you need healing, you pray healing scriptures over your child. Okay, but
Mm.
I felt like this is one of the one times in my life where I thought I kind of almost had this audible voice that said to me, just love him the way he is. And I was like, oh, okay. Like I'm praying for him. God, what do I do? What do and I just felt like he just said, just love him the way he is. I'm like, oh, okay. And then a friend from church, she approached me one day. She's like, you should be speaking the word over him. You should be praying da, da, da. And I was like, stop. I said, God told me to love him the way he is. Do I believe he could be healed someday? Absolutely. I do. But for now, this is what I feel like I was told to do.
I love that slogan, love him for the way he is. And as a matter of
And
fact,
that's just, yeah. And that's just what I did. So every little thing that he did was adorable to me, like he had a great sense of humor. He was silly. He was, and, yeah, okay, he got violent and he did all that stuff. But what I did was I separated that. I was like, no, that's this autism thing that would come on him and make him violent and angry, and then it would go away, and then I would have my sweet Robbie back. So I had to kind of separate, so that, because you can get very angry at your child and very resentful and whatever, it's very emotional, and I had to kind of separate that. That's how I dealt with it.
well, I also love that you have infused faith in scripture
Absolutely.
to your, into your parenting. Now, you said from age 17 he started to have seizures. Talk to us about the last 10 years of his life, and then after.
Well, once the seizure started, it was very traumatic on my younger son. And we had a neighbor that they had a son that also had seizures. So we set up a protocol that as soon if we had to call 911, David, go right next door and you go stay with them. And they would tell David, yes, our son, he'll be fine. Everything's going to be okay. And Robbie would always have these vomiting episodes before the seizures would come. And since he was nonverbal, he used to make noises. He would make sounds. So sometimes some of his sounds sounded like, but sometimes it sounded like almost like he was getting ready to vomit. And my son, David, would immediately, his stomach would tighten up and he'd get anxiety. And he was becoming very nervous kid. And he was shy, and it was becoming it was traumatizing him. But I wasn't paying attention to that because my focus was all on Robbie. I was like, oh, we all were a nervous wreck. As soon as he started the vomiting, oh no, this is we have to call the ambulance. Oh, the seizures are horrible to watch. So the third time in the hospital, I looked at him and I had been keeping a schedule, and I found out that every time he was off of school, he was making himself sick. Every weekend he was getting diarrhea, and then it was Thanksgiving weekend, Christmas vacation, February vacation, Easter vacation. He had another seizure. And by May, I'm looking at him in the hospital. I said, oh my God, he doesn't want to be home with us anymore. If he could live in school, he would
Mm,
be happy. I had to read his mind. So
mm,
that's when I said, all right, I need to do something. I need to call in some help. And I called the state. They came in, they evaluated. They couldn't believe how severe he was. They couldn't believe that I was doing this by myself this whole time. The state does whatever they can to keep them in the home. And I had to put Robbie on a list, and he was number 4,555 on the waiting list. That's how many people are waiting for group homes. And
wow.
this was 10 years ago, whatever. Right. So there's probably, who knows how many, 50,000 waiting on the list now. Um, then I found out that that list is not the correct list. You have to get them on an emergency list because they only take the emergency placements. And then I had to prove that the seizures, then what happened was my next door neighbor's son had a seizure in his sleep and passed away. And now, how do I tell my son David, oh, Robbie's going to be okay, when the boy next door just died from a seizure? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And that was 3 months after John Travolta's son had died of a seizure in the
Mm,
Bahamas. Okay. So now we're really terrified that so I have, and I know that they're brought on by stress. So now my goal is, let's take away as much stress as possible and get him in an environment where he's, not stressed. Um, Long story short, we finally got him in a group home. It took a couple of years. We get him in a group home, and it's a disaster. They had no idea what they were doing. They've never dealt with anyone with autism before. They had no training in people with autism. He would have a behavior, they would call the police. I showed up one time, and my son, mind you, he has the mental capacity of a toddler. He's still wearing a diaper and can't talk. Okay. I show up, and the police are taking my son out of the house in handcuffs. And I had to, I wanted to go nuts, but I didn't want to end up in handcuffs myself, so I had to keep myself calm. I rode with them in the ambulance to Trinitas. It's a behavior health hospital. And I asked the police officer, I said, do you have any training with people with autism? He said, no, we don't. And I said, well, that's obvious. And then I shut my mouth. But
mm,
that's something else that needs to be done. Police officers need training. Everybody needs training. So we got him in there, and when he first got into the group home, within 48 hours, he had another seizure and ended up in the hospital. And I brought him home. I said, he's never going back. So we had to change the whole system of how he could go back in gradually. And it took a couple of years. And then he ended up in a day program that was run by people from his old school. After 21 is another issue. There was nothing out there for them. That's when I started doing my video blog of him. I started following him around and talking about, after 21, there's nothing out there. There's no day programs. If they have seizures, they won't take them. If they have behaviors, they won't take them. It was a group of 6 moms that had autistic kids from Basking Ridge, that they had their own fundraiser, created their own foundation, the Hope Autism Foundation. They started their own day program, and that's where Robbie ended up going. And then they linked up with our house that had group homes. So I was able to get Robbie into a group home run by our house. So it was the same staff, day program, group home, the whole thing. We had moved him around probably 6 times. We finally got everything all set up, and he was happy, and everything was the way we had everything set for him. And then one morning, 7:00 in the morning, I get a phone call that he had a seizure, and they said, it's been 20 minutes. I said, 20 minutes? You mean a 20-minute seizure? You got to be kidding. And they hung up. I was like, what's going on? So I ran to the hospital, and I get there, and normally the ambulance is there waiting for me because he lives 2 miles from the hospital, and there's no ambulance. I'm like, what's going on? I was so confused. And I called my pastor. I said, start a prayer chain, start praying. I don't know what's going on. I called my husband. He shows up. My husband calls the group home, and he says, is there a police officer there? Because I knew they called 911. He says, let me talk to the police officer. He walks away. I'm talking to his friend that drove him here. My husband comes back, and he hangs up the phone. He says, Robbie's in heaven. And that was it. I mean, it was like a scene out of a movie. I was screaming, no, you're lying. You're lying. He's coming. It was just
Oh, no.
horrible, horrible. Just
I'm so sorry. Like I'm getting goosebumps just like listening to you. Like, oh my God, I could just imagine the horror that you've been through. I'm very,
it's
very,
every mother's nightmare.
oh,
And it was the phone call that I always, every time that phone rang at 7 in the morning, I knew it was a group home calling me to say he had a seizure. I mean, they're just so stressful. But what I wanted to say was when we did finally get Robbie in the group home, everything changed for my young son. The environment changed here in the house, and I watched my younger son blossom because he didn't have that constant stress of, oh no, are we going to call the ambulance? So that helped. But also my husband and Robbie we're butting heads. My husband, he's Italian, he's loud. I always have to remind him, indoor voice, And it was when he would get worked up about something, that's when Robbie would come out and go after him. And you had to keep, Robbie reads people's energy and the tone of their voice. And when I talked to him, I would always have to be like very playful and silly when I talked to him, because if I sounded like this, aggressive, because he didn't understand what you were saying.
you know, funny how you were saying about the energy. And I am a huge believer that, we transfer our energy. It's very contagious. And
Yeah.
also when the thing that you're doing, even with colors, I said colors is also energy. Was in you being a paint diva, for instance, like
Yes.
were there colors that you cannot use on his environment that stimulates negative energy?
Yeah, so this room that I'm in used to be his it was his bedroom, and then we just turned it into his TV room. When my girls moved out, they moved into their room. But I had painted a mural in here of it was the ocean and surfboards and palm trees, and because he loved the water, and I always said if he could live in the water, he would. So that was the environment that I created for him. And in his bedroom, I painted his Disney characters and whatever made him happy. But blue is very calming and restful, and so blue is a great color. I avoid red, bright yellows, orange, like that stuff is just, it's very it's
Like energy.
stimulating, and red can cause arguments. So,
Oh, really?
and it stimulates the appetite. So I'm like, no red anywhere
I know,
ever,
you know what they say that even in restaurants they paint the walls red because it
because it
makes you
stimulates the appetite. It
anyway,
stimulates the appetite. Yeah.
yeah.
But it
I,
also causes arguments.
I'd love for you to take a moment to talk about the amazing book series that you have created in Robbie's memory. I know that
Sure.
right behind you I see
Yeah, they
are
are.
they the books?
Yeah, there they are.
So
Yeah. So
how did it all start?
it started because I was working on writing a book on how to choose paint colors for your home. Okay. And our friend Carolina had, I called her up one day and I asked her about a PR person that maybe she could recommend that could help me kind of get word out about the Paint Diva book. And when I called this woman up, she had Googled me, of course, and she said, "What is this Robbie and Me Autism Reality? What is that all about?" And she was referring to my YouTube page. So I told her the whole story about Robbie and how I had videotaped and blah, blah, blah. She said, "Well, what are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, good question. I'm not quite sure. I built up a following, and I had all this momentum going, and now I'm not videotaping, and I don't really know what to do." She said, "Well, why don't you write a book?" I said, "Well, I did actually have this idea of writing a children's book about a little penguin with autism." And she was like, "Oh my God, that's huge. You have to do that." I was like,
Why penguin?
"I'll tell you why. Because the day Robbie went to heaven, you know how all your family and friends come over to visit. Okay. And we had all this family over, and somebody went outside as they were leaving. They saw this little penguin out of my front yard. It's a toy, but it opens up. It's almost like you can hide a ring in there or something. So interesting. So I have 3 little nieces, and they came back inside. They said, "Were your nieces here today? Did they drop this?" And I said, "No, they haven't been here." Then my husband goes back to work, and he sees, if you see up there, there's a glass paperweight penguin, and it's sitting on his desk. And he said, "Where did this come from?" And nobody at work knew. Nobody had ever seen it before. It probably was there for years, and he just never paid attention to it. And we just kept finding these penguins everywhere. It was like, I'm like, what is going on with the penguins? The day of his memorial service, my daughter had a dream that Robbie showed up at my front door in a tuxedo. So I wanted to tell the story to everybody. So I Googled, because he kind of looked like Leonardo DiCaprio, right? So I look up this picture of, I'm looking for a picture of Leo in a tuxedo, and as I Googled it, they show a tux is called a penguin suit.
Oh
I was
my
like,
God.
oh,
Like,
come on, come on. So then a couple weeks later, we went to go clean out his room at his group home. And he always watched Disney videos. I said, I'm just curious to see what was the last movie he ever watched. I hit the eject player on the DVD player, and out comes Happy Feet, the movie
oh
about the
my
dancing
goodness.
penguins. I said, you have got to be kidding me. I said, this is Robbie. I'm getting messages from heaven.
Yes,
He's telling
yes,
me something
yes,
about penguins. I'm like, I
exactly.
knew he liked Mary Poppins, the scene with the little cartoon dancing penguins, but I didn't know how much he loved penguins. Okay.
Wow. So talk about like how much more do I need to show you to tell like this is me. So basically, he keeps showing up as a
Exactly.
penguin. How beautiful.
Exactly. So that's why I said, oh, all right, if I do a children's book, it obviously should be about a penguin. What else would it be about? Right.
Oh,
So this
that's
woman
so
had this
beautiful.
reaction. She's like, oh, you have to write these books. That's huge. So I posted on Facebook and I get like 400 responses on there. That's amazing. You totally have to do it. I was like, who thought a children's book would be such a big deal? So I sat down. I wrote the first story. Typical children's books are 25 pages, right? So, and I wrote in rhyme. And I wrote the first story, and it was about him going to daycare. The teacher notices that he won't sit for circle time. He gets up. He likes to spin. He doesn't talk. He likes to rock. He's not like the other penguins, and she recommends you get him evaluated. He goes to the doctor. The doctor diagnoses him with autism, and that's it. That's the end. It's 25 pages. I said,
By
well,
the way, you also sing, right? Like you're a singer
correct.
writer as well. Like, oh my God, like talk about amazingly talented you are. So don't tell us what the content of the book because we would love the audience to actually pick up
Yes,
a couple of these books and actually
absolutely.
it's an absolutely beautiful gift. Now, if they want to buy the set of books, where can they find them?
It's on Amazon. It's on Amazon.
And what is it called?
I have a book website too. It's just robbiesworldbook.com. They can go on there and it's a link to all three of the books. It also tells more about our story and that type of thing. So I just wanted to mention there's 12 stories now, all the way from beginning to end. And I
How
didn't
many
want to
books do
do
you have so far?
so there is 3 books, and I didn't want to do 12 separate books. First of all, it's too expensive if you self-publish to do that. But also, I didn't want people to buy book 1 3 5 and not read the whole story. So I
Mm.
had to figure out how to do this. I didn't want one book of 12 chapters. It's overwhelming. It's too big. So I split it into 3 books. So there's 4 chapters in each book. Okay.
Now,
So there's book
there's
one,
something
two, and
that
three, but it's the whole story.
now you have this amazing mothers from Basking Ridge. Have you continued to work with the people with children with autism to help them?
Yeah. So what um I had gotten a call from the governor's office that they wanted to read one of my books, and they said, oh, and by the way, um they want to do something to help autism families. And I said, oh,
Wow.
really? Okay. That's nice, but maybe they should know what autism families actually need. So I called up a bunch of my friends that have kids with autism. I said, hey, jump on a Zoom call with me and let's talk about what's going on in your life, and what do you think needs to be done? Like if you need help from the government or whatever, like what do you think should be done? I asked them all about their kids and their lives, but how their kid was diagnosed with autism, where'd they go to school, what kind of therapies. And then at the end, I said, hypothetically, if you sat down with the governor, what would you tell him that we need? And then they would answer my question. Because I was preparing myself. If I ever talk to somebody in government, I want to be prepared. I want to know. I want
Yes.
to have an answer for them.
Yeah.
So
That's
the interviews were so good, I decided to turn them into a podcast. So I
good.
just keep
What's the
going.
name
I
of your
just keep
podcast?
answering. Yeah, I just keep
Oh,
asking questions, and I'm learning so much from all these other parents and parents of the younger kids too, because things have changed.
do you have a
It's
Facebook group for parents with autistic children?
I have a group. Well, no, not yet. Right now, I have the podcast, but my next thing that I want to do is in October, I'm going to host a kind of a retreat weekend conference type of thing. I'm going to rent out a hotel and I'm bringing in different speakers, but I want the moms to have fun. I want them to get a break because autistic kids don't sleep. Moms don't get any sleep, and
Wow.
they're very isolated. You lose all your friends and family. People stop inviting you to come over for the holidays. They don't invite you to come over for parties, and Robbie went to school only for autistic kids. He didn't play soccer and baseball. I didn't meet other parents. I didn't know any of the parents in his school.
So
So
if
you end up having
they
no friends.
follow you, we only have like 5 minutes. So
Okay,
how do we
sure.
like if they
If they
want
want
to
to follow
follow you?
me, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. The YouTube channel is Robbie and Me Autism Reality. And so my Facebook page is Robbie's World, which is the book, Robbie's World / Robbie and Me Autism Reality. Or if you see my name, Cindy Gelormini, you can just find me on Instagram as Cindy Gelormini. But yeah, I'm very excited about this retreat weekend because I want all these moms to get together and make new friends.
Yes,
And I have a comedian
definitely.
coming.
We're we are streaming live from the Divorce Dynasty platform, so
Mhm.
we're going to put all of those information on where you can actually follow Cindy Gel
Gelormini.
Gelormini. I didn't want
Yes.
to make another mistake and
Yes.
say that, and also be able to be part of that retreat, and also follow her podcast and buy her books, because obviously this is
Yes.
a great eye opener for
Yeah.
many people who are going through these challenges. And when Carolina, who is a divorce attorney, family law attorney, and international law attorney, comes back, I would love to also ask her, what are the challenges of going through a divorce when you have children with autism? So we
Yeah,
can.
it's just another layer. It's another layer because you have to pay for their therapies and, what's covered under insurance and what's not. And there's more. When I put them in a group home, they said, make sure, tell your relatives, do not leave your child in their inheritance. They can have no money in their name. I mean, these are all interviews that I'm going to do. I'm going to bring these people on my podcast. The first 6 interviews I did, every one of those moms were single moms and were divorced. And that's when I
Yes.
said, I have to bring Carolina on my
Always,
show.
before we close the show, we always ask our special guests, what 3 life hacks or life tips can you share with the audience, for those who are going through what you've been through?
Yeah. Well, every one of my books starts with Robbie's a penguin who likes riding in the car. His mama always says, I love you just the way you are. And that's the number one thing. That is how you handle life with your husband, your children, anyone. I love you just the way you are. Don't try to change them. Love them the way they are and accept it. People don't try to change your autistic kids. Just love them the way they are, and cheer them on with every accomplishment and everything that they do. Keeping a positive attitude, always switch things around for the positive, and pray, faith.
That's very, very powerful. Actually, one last question.
Mhm.
Give one very powerful tip that you can give couples so that they don't end up in divorce when they're going through challenges with raising children with autism.
Yeah, just be very open and honest with each other about your feelings, and fight it out. But the Bible says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. And so we always would make up by the end of the day before we went to bed.
My goodness, what a beautiful, I wish we had a lot more time to share, because I certainly would follow your podcast as well, because I'm all about resilience, on how you be able to turn your mess into your message about how you can, live joyful, vibrant lives despite the many challenges that you're going through in life. And you exemplify that so remarkably. I am inspired, and I'm sure many of our listeners are in awe of your courage, your strength, your wisdom, and your tenacity to be able to make a difference in the lives of others despite all the challenges that you've been through in life. So thank you so very much for sharing your love, your faith, and your wonderful words of wisdom. Any last
Thanks
words
for
before
having
we
me.
go?
No, that's it. They can just, if they follow me on Instagram, I post the podcast on there, and the information about the books or whatever's, and it'll about the retreat, anything they want to know, just follow me on Instagram.
That's awesome. Thank you so very much. You are beautiful inside and out. And on behalf of Carolina Denhard, this is Furley Almonte, your host for the D Word. Until next time, stay well, stay vibrantly, and live in gratitude. Take care now. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye bye.